Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 21, Ancient Sword Name. Li Jinglong hovered around outside the court hall for a quarter of an hour before he saw the officials come out one by one and pass by him, leaving behind only the Judiciary Department's deputy chief, Huang Yang, and his old superior, Hu Sheng. Li Jinglong straightened up and stared at them, waiting for the final result. Hu Sheng looked at Li Jinglong but said nothing as he was calculating the countermeasures of the situation. Over the years, he had not known much about this former subordinate of his. At that time, Li Jinglong's reputation in the Longwu army was quite inferior. Hu Sheng had once confidentially asked the ministry officers why they didn't like Li Jinglong. His other subordinates also said that he was mysterious and hadn't made the situation clear. In any case, they didn't like him and thought that he was too proud. Some people said he had some peculiarities. Hu Sheng didn't ask any further questions about it. It was just troublesome as he thought of how he would have to help make arrangements for him once the exorcism department was clamped down. Would he move him back to the Longwu army? Li Jinglong just stood there quietly, waiting for the two men to speak. Huang Yang and Hu Sheng both had the same thoughts. This man in front of them was too pitiful. He was a grown man, his ancestral house was sold, and he didn't have any family. All he had was the exorcism department that had finally turned for the better, and yet that was also going to be clamped down upon. Hu Sheng paced a few steps and asked, "Do you have a little brother under you?" Li Jinglong's complexion changed for fear that Hung Jun might have done something wrong. When he glanced at Huang Yang, he immediately recalled that he had been with Hung Jun when Huang Yang came that day. Huang Yang presumably told him about it. "Yes," Li Jinglong said. "Why? Bring him over and then you'll move back to the Longwu army," Hu Sheng said. "On the 5th day of next month, the exorcism department will remove its tablet. You will be allotted 10 days to move. The rest will be dismissed, and the Ministry of Appointments will help them settle down." Li Jinglong's mind instantly resounded with a boom, as if something had exploded. He thought he had misheard those words and blankly asked, "What? Don't kick up a fuss," Hu Sheng said. "I've been on my last legs from all your troubles for the past several years, so do you think I want this? Pull yourself together, and we'll talk about it in a few days." After that, Hu Sheng bypassed Li Jinglong and left. Huang Yang spoke, "Li Zhenji, I believe that there are Yaos in the world, and I also believe in your conduct. However, there are some things that really won't go your way. That's the hardest thing in life. Since you have inherited Lord Di's sword, you must know the principles of concealing your strength and biding your time." Li Jinglong hadn't heard what Huang Yang said as he quickly turned around to chase after Hu Sheng. When he came out of the Judiciary Department, he already couldn't find a trace of Hu Sheng. He stood in the street, at a loss, as if the heavens had revolved and the earth was spinning. Li Jinglong didn't even know how he got back to the exorcism department as he entered the front hall on the 5th of the watch period. The Akala enveloping itself with a layer of flames while holding its 6 dharma implements was calmly gazing at him. Several cups and bowls were scattered in the courtyard. The couch in the hall had been moved out, lying across under the parasol tree, with some tea leaves scattered on the ground. It seemed that they had spent some time enjoying themselves under the parasol tree. The lamps were already put out in everyone's room. They apparently went to bed first before waiting for him, lest they might face another visitor again tomorrow and turn the day and night into a mockery. Li Jinglong stood in the courtyard, silently staring at the scene in front of him. Hung Jun was lying on the couch, sinking into a strange dream. In his dream, Chang'an was surrounded by a sea of blood and mountains of corpses, filled with black mist and dead people everywhere, just like the Ao fish scurrying in Daming Palace. The hands of the dead bodies extended toward him one after another, trying to drag him in. He panicked and tried to set up his pentacolored sacred light, but found that his meridians were already empty. He looked around, wanting to go back to the exorcism department. However, at that moment, he didn't know why, but the one he thought of wasn't Chongming nor Qing Xiang, but actually Li Jinglong. He shouted, "Zhenqi? Zhenqi, where are you?" He staggered and ran along the city of Chang'an, where there were dead bodies everywhere. The black mist rolled up from behind and froze his back, causing him to fall to the ground, and shouted, "Li Jinglong! Li Jinglong!" When he got up again, he felt a valiant force on his chest, which almost broke through his torso, causing him great pain. "Li Jinglong! Hung Jun!" In the room, Hung Jun was on the point of rolling under the couch when Li Jinglong heard him calling out his name. He immediately lunged forward and caught him. Hung Jun suddenly woke up and was about to shout once more when Li Jinglong hurriedly made a hushing gesture and looked at him in surprise. Hung Jun was drenched in sweat, his eyes wide open, face pale, and was gasping for breath. Li Jinglong asked in a low voice, "Nightmare?" He got down on his knees and cradled Hung Jun. Hung Jun grasped his clothes, buried his head in Li Jinglong's arms, and let out a long sigh. That night, Li Jinglong's lamp in the room was lit up. Hung Jun took the calming decoction in the east courtyard and passed by Li Jinglong's room. Li Jinglong said, "Come in, and also give me some." Hung Jun agreed. "When I get it ready, I'll give some to you." He still remembered the scene on that day when Li Jinglong turned him away. Later, he had specially asked the Carpiao, who had told him that some people did not like others entering their rooms, so Hung Jun had kept that in mind. "Stay with me for a while," Li Jinglong said. Hung Jun went in barefoot. He rubbed out a flame, lit up the small copper furnace near the table, put on a copper bowl, and began to mix the ingredients. "Did you often have dreams as a child?" Li Jinglong asked. "No." Hung Jun shook his head. "Only after I descended the mountains did I have nightmares." "Homesick?" Li Jinglong sighed and asked once again. He took off his robe, dressed in his unlined snow-like garment. He sat down on his knees on the other side, facing Hung Jun. Hung Jun gently boiled the ingredients in the bowl with a copper spoon. The flames reflected in his heroic young eyes, seeming somewhat gloomy. Hearing the word homesick, he lifted his eyes to see Li Jinglong and then smiled. That smile immediately made Li Jinglong, whose life was almost hopeless, feel the strings in his heart gently plucked, which echoed a sound and then swept away like ripples, layer upon layer. Zhao Zilong said that people always lose a lot of things and only when they turn around can they see the good sides of them, Hung Jun said smilingly. "I'm homesick now because I'm away from home, but I also like the exorcism department and everyone here." Li Jinglong, with a little confusion in his eyes, asked, "What do you like about the exorcism department?" "Parasol trees." Hung Jun turned his head and leaned forward as he looked out of the room, and added, "You even gave me paintings, took me to play, and kept me company." Li Jinglong responded in a low voice, "I don't know why, but I always feel like I'm kindred spirits with you." It seemed that the fragrance of the mixed ingredients played a role as Li Jinglong's worries alleviated. He couldn't help but look at the young man in front of him and wonder why he had always taken special care of him. Because unlike the other three, he had his own plans? No. Because he was beautiful and made people's hearts grow affectionate towards him? Not that either. What happened today? Hung Jun looked up again and asked. Li Jinglong saw a vague thought in Hung Jun's eyes and suddenly achieved a speedy enlightenment. He couldn't help but smile and understood. Hung Jun didn't understand many things. Unlike other people, he had never looked at him with thoughts of derision. Unlike the officials in the Longwu army, he never looked down on a dish and crawled high while stepping on the low. He didn't try to calculate what people were thinking and had even less of a desire to pry into the people's hearts. He didn't think of himself as wise, nor did he undervalue himself, just ignorant of the world and of human feelings. People always like to be friends with simple ones, no scheming and no deceiving. "Did I cause trouble for you again?" Hung Jun asked. Li Jinglong was overjoyed, helplessly smiling and shaking his head. Hung Jun looked puzzled, unable to make sense of what Li Jinglong was thinking. As a matter of fact, he had come to understand most people whenever they struck deep implications. He knew himself that people in this world often had a way with words. "Are you also this carefree at home?" Li Jinglong asked. "Entrapping people and getting into trouble. Chongming is too terrifying when he grows angry," Hung Jun said. "Who would dare? It's just bad luck, that's all." "A bit." Li Jinglong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He felt that since he met Hung Jun, unlucky things had happened one after another, in a much more exaggerated fashion than his experience in the past 20 years. "You all don't understand ordinary humans," Li Jinglong said. "It takes a lot of suffering for ordinary humans to live." Hung Jun nodded and said, "Right, ordinary humans suffer a lot. Yao and Mo's, Yaos are the monsters in the mountain and wild guais. Mo's are the rage and pain of all living things." Li Jinglong wondered, "They say exorcism department. Why not say exorcising Yao department? I've already seen Yaos, but what about Mo's? Where are they? Are they also in Chang'an?" Hung Jun thought about it and said, "Because the exorcism department's ultimate responsibility is to dispel the sufferings of the divine land, expel the inner Mo's of all living things, dispel the years of the Mo's obstacles, and purify the world." From what Hung Jun recalled, he never had any troubles. Chongming's warmth was like a barrier protecting him at all times and places. However, since he had left Taihang Mountains, in only 2 months, he found that there was so much pain and sadness in the divine land, and that humans' joys and sorrows were too vehement. Along the way he had seen poverty, death, sickness, and old age. The Carpiao told him that these were the world's hardships: living, old age, illness, death, hatred, partings, begging, and the suffering from the flourishing of the 5 skandhas. All sorts of pain spread into the world's sap and pulse as they unceasingly moved in cycles, purified by this dusky, powerful force. However, once beyond the threshold of purification of the world, evil pulses would converge into Mo's. Hung Jun always remembered the Mara that Qingxiang had mentioned before his words were interrupted by Chongming. He was utterly curious about this Mo's existence, but the Carpiao had only explained the origin of Mo's and no longer spoke about it. After Hung Jun's explanation, Li Jinglong frowned and said, "Perhaps this was the predestined fate of the divine land that Lord De had referred to." Hung Jun studied Li Jinglong's worried expression and said with a smile, "You are always unhappy." "I can't get happy," Li Jinglong said wearily. When he looked at Hung Jun, he once again felt better. He smiled with relief and said, "But every time I talk to you, I feel much better." "You haven't taken the medicine yet." Hung Jun took the boiling water, poured it into the copper bowl, and dissolved the medicine. "Did they make you pay for the damages?" "I still have some." As Hung Jun was about to get up to take out his pearls, Li Jinglong said, "It's not enough to compensate for the loss. Forget about it. I'll think of another way. The most troublesome thing is that the whole court doesn't like me, but this is also reasonable." "What about your emperor?" Hung Jun said. "The palace is his. Just apologize to him, and he'll assent, right? I even burned Yejin Palace before I went down the mountains." Li Jinglong. Hung Jun roused the man from a trance with just a brief remark. No matter what happened, Li Longji was still the one who would give the final nod. A word from him would be more efficacious than anything else in the world. Li Jinglong frowned. As long as the emperor knew what they were doing and trusted them, what could the officials do? However, how could they persuade the emperor to believe these sequences of events? Yet, at least it was a solution, and they would have to hurry and do it before the 5th day of the next month. "I'll think it over again," Li Jinglong said. "The case hasn't been settled yet. There are Yaos in the imperial palace." He thought through a faint, vague outline, and Hung Jun handed the medicine bowl to him. Li Jinglong motioned for him to drink first as he began to think of a solution. After Hung Jun drank half of it, Li Jinglong then took it and drank it down. The medicine seems to have a bit too much, Hung Jun said in a daze. Li Jinglong had just finished drinking the medicine when he saw Hung Jun's dazed eyes and that he was about to fall, and he rushed up to help him. All of a sudden, his mind burst into dizziness, and he stood unsteadily. You! Hung Jun! Li Jinglong whirled around and hurriedly sat down, which caused Hung Jun to lose support and lean against Li Jinglong, already asleep. What medicine is this? Wait! Li Jinglong's whole body was already powerless. Leaning against the couch, he clutched his hand frantically for support when it slipped down, and then he thoroughly lost consciousness. The next morning, the sun shone into the room. As A Tai passed by Li Jinglong's room, he abruptly saw the latter lying on the edge of the couch with his legs slightly parted, together with Hung Jun who was lying on his body. Both of them were wearing their unlined garments while sleeping comfortably. A Tai! Chu Yangxi! A Tai hurriedly beckoned him to the courtyard. Chu Yangxi, who had an extremely keen sense of gossip, quickly trotted over. Seeing the scene inside the room, they both looked like a carpiao with their mouths wide open. Should we call Mo Rijin to come and see? Close your mouth! What's there to see? Quickly, close Zhenqi's door. Did you hear that last night? Hung Jun repeatedly called out his name. Zhenqi, Zhenqi. Li Jinglong. Jinglong. Did I mishear that? Right, right. I heard that. So that's how it is. But weren't they in Hung Jun's room? The sound came from the right. As their voices gradually faded, Li Jinglong woke up. He regained consciousness and looked down. Seeing Hung Jun lying on his body, his heart suddenly sped up. He reached out his hand and patted him, whispering, "Hung Jun? Wake up!" Hung Jun slept like a log. Last night, while they were talking, the bowl of calming concoction was boiled too much together with the ingredients, causing them to lose consciousness after drinking it. Li Jinglong wanted to take him back to his room, but everyone must be up already. Moreover, if he was seen by Zhao Zilong, he was afraid that the carpiao would only cause disturbance out of nothing. Li Jinglong couldn't stand him the most, so he could only lift Hung Jun up, put him on the couch, and cover him with a quilt. In the main hall, Mo Rijin was in the middle of twisting a leather shield that he had gotten out of nowhere, A Tai was playing with a crystal, and Chu Yangxi was boiling tea. When Li Jinglong came over after washing up, everyone hurriedly questioned him concerning yesterday's matter. Li Jinglong gave out an hum sound, but that wasn't a large obstacle. He thoroughly thought about it as he received the tea from Chu Yangxi. A Tai and Chu Yangxi exchanged a strange look while Mo Rijin cast them a quizzical one. Then, the case was concluded. A Tai asked. "Not yet," Li Jinglong said. "We'll continue to investigate today." Everyone's faces were entirely full of doubts. Li Jinglong thought about it yet again and finally stated, "All of you, can you teach me mana?" The corners of their mouths twitched. "I don't want to drag everyone down." Li Jinglong stated accurately. "You're right. As an ordinary human, pure force will never suffice in capturing Yaos." When Hung Jun woke up, he only felt that his fatigue of the past days had cleared away. Stretching, he suddenly found a nice smell on the quilt. Looking up again, he also found that it wasn't his own room. How did he sleep in Li Jinglong's? "Zhenqi! Li Zhenqi!" Hung Jun called out. "Where are you?" Li Jinglong and the other three were talking in the courtyard when they suddenly heard Hung Jun's calls. Li Jinglong was embarrassed and was about to go back to explain when Mo Rijin said in astonishment, "Hung Jun? What's going on?" Hung Jun ran out, dressed in white, said, "Li Zhenqi? What happened last night?" The cup in the carpiao's hand fell with a clang. Li Jinglong gestured to him to stop talking nonsense, but Hung Jun was still at a loss as he continued, "How did I sleep in your room? You even covered me with a quilt." Surprised, Mo Rijin looked at Li Jinglong and then to Hung Jun. A Tai and Chu Yangxi said in unison, "No way! How could that be?" "Li Jinglong," cried the Carpiao. "What have you done to our families?" Hung Jun. Li Jinglong could bear it no longer and roared, "Kong Hung Jun! You drank a calming concoction. Did you smell Lihun pollen and forgot all about it? Last night, you had a nightmare and called out, and then you wanted to boil a calming concoction and borrowed the furnace in my room." Remembering this, Hung Jun guiltily nodded and said, "Strange. Why would I call you? How should I know?" Li Jinglong inexplicably roared. "Go back and get dressed. Zhenqi, you don't have to explain yourself so clearly." A Tai said. Right, Chu Yangxi said. "We all understand." "You understand nothing." Li Jinglong was too infuriated that it took him a long time to calm down. Hung Jun changed his clothes and came out. He sat down under the corridor and ate his food. He curiously looked around, seeing A Tai and Chu Yangxi teaching Li Jinglong mana in the courtyard. "There's no spiritual power in my meridians," Li Jinglong said. "Actually, Zhenqi," Mo Rijin said. "As a human, you're already extraordinary." Li Jinglong sighed and said, "It's not enough." In front of the fox Yao and the Ao fish, Li Jinglong had depended on Hung Jun who had shielded him at that time. If he rushed up, it was very likely that he would have been swallowed by the Yaoguai. Chu Yangxi said, "To conduct oneself, the most important thing is the brain." Nodding, he added, "And mana comes next. My grandfather said that if you only rely upon your magic weapon, cultivation, and everything of brute force, sooner or later, you'll encounter death in the hands of the Yaoguais. Moreover, you have Hung Jun," A Tai said. "Right, you have Hung Jun," Mo Rijin and Chu Yangxi echoed. "Hung Jun." Li Jinglong put down his sword. Hung Jun came out of the courtyard and said, "I've been curious for a long time. What magic weapon is this?" This was the third time that Hung Jun had seriously studied the sword. Then he said, "Qing Xiang once said that even a mortal without power can be an exorcist when a magic weapon is properly used." "That's true," Chu Yangxi said. "A lot of exorcists also lack innate spiritual veins and only rely on a few magic weapons to vanquish an enemy. Let me see the sword." This was the first time that Chu Yangxi, A Tai, and Mo Rijin had taken such a close look at Li Jinglong's sword. Li Jinglong said, "This sword seems to have a connection with Hung Jun's throwing knife." Hung Jun spun the throwing knife between his fingers and tried to inject his spiritual power into it. The throwing knife lit up, and so did the long, unadorned black sword. "Yo!" All were surprised. Hung Jun said, "When the throwing knife is pierced into a Yaoguai, it will likely be active in response to the Yao's energy. Perhaps this long sword and throwing knife are made of the same type of iron." "Maybe," Chu Yangxi mumbled. "Can you make it brighter?" The throwing knife resonated with the long sword, and a line of characters appeared on the sword, glowing brighter and brighter. "This," Chu Yangxi looked up to Li Jinglong and then looked down at the sword. Li Jinglong frowned and asked, "What? How much was this sword?" asked Chu Yangxi. 550,000 taels, Li Jinglong said. "Even if it was 5,500,000 for one, give me another 10, Chu Yangxi said with a smile, handing the sword back to Li Jinglong. He was the one who knows the most about magic weapons here, so when Chu Yangxi said this, they all involuntarily straightened up. "What magic weapon is this?" Li Jinglong asked. "The Sword of Wisdom." Chu Yangxi answered. "What?" The Carpiao was shocked. "You know about it?" Li Jinglong asked. The Carpiao, "I don't." Li Jinglong. The Carpiao, "I just think it's a good time to be surprised and set the mood." Everyone collapsed. End chapter. Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 22. Searching for Yaos in the Academy. Li Jinglong suddenly remembered something and hurried to the front hall, looking up at Akala's sword of wisdom. The solemn Dharma of Akala seemed to be guarding over the whole world. The appearance of its sword was exactly the same as that of the rusty black sword in Li Jinglong's hand. This is the great sword of wisdom that subdues yaos and defeats Mo's, Chu Yongxi explained. There are rumors that it can destroy all the evil spirits in the world. Hung Jun frowned deeply as he looked up at Akala and then at the sword in Li Jinglong's hand. At that moment, there was only one puzzling thought in his heart: how could the sword of wisdom break through his pentacolored sacred light? Chongming said that this was known as the world's strongest shield and that it could even withstand Mount Tai's fall. So as long as this magic weapon is used properly, Chu Yongxi consoled, Zhenqi, it is not a mere dream then, if you want to be an exorcist without an innate spiritual vein. We'll see what more of this sword can do. Li Jinglong nodded and responded that he understood as he put away the sword. Everyone exchanged meaningful glances. They all felt that Li Jinglong seemed to have come across some setbacks last night. He didn't say anything, and no one asked either. Based on his countenance and words, Li Jinglong had now regained some confidence. Continue investigating the case today, Li Jinglong said. Whatever rumors there are outside, keep in mind that we do what we should do and have nothing to do with others. Everyone agreed. Li Jinglong let Chu Yongxi and Hung Jun form a team, A Tai and Mo as the other, while he would act alone. Chu Yongxi and Hung Jun would go to inquire where Chang'an's exam candidates resided. A Tai and Mo would go to Pingkong Li to make some inquiries about the candidates who had recently gone there to make merry. Is this necessary? A Tai asked. Zhenqi, how about we figure out a way to first? Daming Palace doesn't matter, Li Jinglong said. If we say that this case is already closed, I don't believe it. Everyone looked at Li Jinglong, who turned around and said, it's not me trying to strut around, but don't you all think it's suspicious that a dried corpse, nameless and unclaimed, suddenly appeared? All right, Chu Yongxi finally agreed. We'll listen to you and investigate. What about you? Hung Jun asked. Come with us. I have something to do, Li Jinglong inattentively responded, frowning. Let's go together. Hung Jun reached out his hand and pulled at Li Jinglong's sleeve. Li Jinglong hastily said, don't pull. This is a government office. That's highly inappropriate. With that, he went out and left in a hurry. Midday. Hung Jun was still in a fog and only followed after Chu Yongxi to investigate the case. This was the first time that he had acted with his partner not being Li Jinglong. Why put him in a team with Chu Yongxi? Chu Yongxi was enormously tall, holding a folding fan in his hand and walking as the wind. He would walk then stop, occasionally standing to wait for Hung Jun. Let's go to the Imperial Academy, Chu Yongxi said. Hungry? Let's have some refreshments and rest. Hung Jun waved his hand. I'm not a voracious eater. How can I be hungry so soon? Chu Yongxi thought and mumbled smilingly. Zhenqi certainly put the two of us together so that we can't caress the fish. Hung Jun asked in all seriousness, when are you guys gonna see Zhenqi's ability? Chu Yongxi laughed heartily and said, Zhenqi is a good man, it's just that he wasn't the way we initially expected. It is our mistake. But Chu Yongxi thought better of it and put the folding fan away. Glancing towards Hung Jun, he asked, it's you, Hung Jun, what made you believe in him in the first place? Hung Jun thought for a moment and said, maybe because the heart lamp is in him. Heart lamp? Chu Yongxi was stunned. Since everyone had come to subdue the Yao King, Hung Jun didn't conceal the matter. He informed Chu Yongxi that the heart lamp had entered Li Jinglong's body by mistake. Chu Yongxi hummed and then said, so that's what it was. No wonder you've been following Li Jinglong since you entered the exorcism department. We wondered what was wrong with us. Hung Jun hastily said that it was nothing of the sort. Chu Yongxi mumbled to himself, if the heart lamp is in him, then this guy might possibly get what he really desires. Hung Jun didn't know how great the heart lamp was, but Chu Yongxi eruditely knew a lot about magic weapons, so maybe he could find ways to take it out. He was about to ask when they had already reached the Imperial Academy. Chu Yongxi made a gesture to Hung Jun, indicating to him to deal with it first. People were going in and out at the entrance of the Imperial Academy. The 5th day of the next month would be the day of the Imperial examination, and more than 6,000 people had gathered here from every part of the country. As the examination period was approaching, in order to avoid the questions leaking out or substitutions from happening, all those who entered and left the Imperial Academy were required to undergo a full-body search. No books outside would be carried in, and all must hold the Imperial Academy's token. Standing outside in the street, Chu Yongxi and Hung Jun watched the comings and goings of people. Chu Yongxi breathlessly waited. When a crowd of people gathered together at the entrance, Chu Yongxi pulled Hung Jun in as well. Ai! Wang Xiang! Wang Xiang, wait for me! Seeing a man passing by, he hurriedly pulled Hung Jun and said, "Quick, I forgot to bring my token with me." At the entrance, with numerous scholars, Chu Yongxi was searched in a hurry. One of the guards asked, "Where's your token?" Chu Yongxi, "I forgot to bring it out with me. I'll go back and get it now." The people behind were urging the guards to make haste. The guard was already getting impatient, but nothing could be found, thus they had to let the man in. Hung Jun was searched next and also nothing was found. When he was about to leave, the opposite side asked, "Where's your token?" "Hold on. Neither of them has a token?" "The one in front, stop. Which court are you two in?" Hung Jun coughed, not knowing what to do. Chu Yongxi came over and said to the guards, "He's a who? He can't understand you, and the token is in my room." "Ai! My token!" Hung Jun regained his senses and laughed at once. "Hi mi ho bai! My dear great Tang friend!" Hung Jun wanted to step forward and hug him, and at the same time the students behind were also about to explode. The two guards were stuck at the entrance and had no choice but to let both men in. Chu Yongxi led Hung Jun through the side hallway, looking back every now and then, saying, "Fortunately, we made it in. Let's look for the proctor here." "Why didn't we come in by climbing the wall?" Hung Jun asked. In Hung Jun's eyes, whether it was entering the Imperial Palace, Daming Palace, or the Imperial Academy, it was all as if treading on flat ground. The only difference was what color the wall in front of him was. Chu Yongxi felt foolish from such a question. Why had they not climbed over the wall? We can't always use force to solve problems. When they arrived at the proctor's room, Chu Yongxi only said that he was looking for his 3 fellow villagers and motioned for Hung Jun to write down the names of the 3. The proctor informed them that they were in the T-shaped building of the plum courtyard. The two of them then went back to the long hallway, passed through the side hall, and were about to enter the plum courtyard. The side hall was built to be extremely spacious, enough for scholars to chat over tea. Hung Jun and Chu Yongxi hurried past it when Hung Jun suddenly stopped and involuntarily glanced at the hall. "What?" Chu Yongxi asked. "Nothing," Hung Jun replied. "Trust your intuition," Chu Yongxi said. "We're investigating a case." "There's a strange sense of familiarity," Hung Jun said. "Can you describe it?" Chu Yongxi glanced sideways at Hung Jun. Why did it feel as if he was at home? There were nearly 40 people, old and young, gathered in the side hall, all of them whispering and laughing. Right at that moment, a young man who was bowing his head came over and accidentally bumped into Hung Jun, causing the latter to reel. The young man hastily apologized, bowing his head with his hands held in front before glancing up at Hung Jun. The young man was thin and lithe, seemingly younger than Hung Jun. With an uneasy look in the young man's eyes, Hung Jun laughed and waved his hand to indicate that it was all right. The young man stepped into the side hall again with a smile on his face, obviously very pleased. With such an action, Hung Jun suddenly remembered the feeling when he was in Yaojin Palace. The young people in there were all birds incarnations. Throughout the Yaojin Palace, there was this kind of Yao atmosphere, but because of Chongming's lofty and unsullied disposition, this Yao atmosphere became more like an immortal air of not eating such things. Yaogwai, Hung Jun said. No longer saying anything, Chu Yongxi turned around and walked in with Hung Jun. Hung Jun whispered, "You feel it too?" Chu Yongxi said, "A Yaogwai ran directly into you, and you still can't feel that." Although there was no magic weapon like a magic mirror, Hung Jun could still feel the Yao spirit at close range. The two of them then sat down in the side hall. "Don't just keep looking around," Chu Yongxi decorously said to Hung Jun and smiled. "Little gentleman, there's a parched rice here. Come, would you also like a cup of tea?" "Yes, yes." Hung Jun liked Chu Yongxi's tea the most. The curdled, crisp fragrance of fresh tea leaves, with some ground sesame seeds added in, and millet grains sprinkled on top made the mouth melt with soft rich sweetness. It was simply one of the human world's most delicious light refreshments. "Pretend to be harmless as you usually are." Chu Yongxi smiled again and said. "Look around. Whoever keeps looking at us is a Yaogwai. Let me know when you see it." Hung Jun. Hung Jun looked around, his eyes filled with the curiosity of strangers to Chang'an. There were several neat rows of tables in the side hall, under which there were pots and furnaces. Outside, the autumn stretched out long and broad, purified with a dark blue sky and large white clouds floating by every now and then. The sun shone in, making this a comfortable, indolent place for resting. The scholars were having their own talks. A few tables away, someone looked towards them, taking a glimpse. "Someone's watching us." Hung Jun smiled at Chu Yongxi. "Aren't there a lot of Yaogwais based on what you've said?" "This is indeed the Yaogwai's lair." Chu Yongxi smiled insincerely and said, "We can't take action now, or else we'll destroy the Imperial Academy. Zhenqi will start crying." Hung Jun noticed that three young people were talking cheerfully and wittily behind another table, while another young man boiled water for them. No one spoke or took notice of the latter. He seemed very bored, turning his head and staring at the courtyard outside the hall. It wasn't long before his gaze shifted, meeting Hung Jun's gaze, and subsequently smiled at him. That smile somewhat had a feminine charm to it. Hung Jun's heart suddenly thumped wildly as his handsome face turned red to his ears. Hung Jun smiled awkwardly. Chu Yongxi asked, "What Yao is it?" "It could be a fox." Hung Jun turned his head and said to Chu Yongxi. That smile just now, Hung Jun had sensed a very obvious charm technique. The young man actually got up and walked towards the two of them. Sitting in front of the table, he smiled and said, "This tea is really fragrant." Hung Jun. In contrast, Chu Yongxi showed no signs of change, saying, "It still needs a bit to boil before it'll be ready, no hurry." "What's this little brother's name?" "Du Hanking." The young man had long, shapely eyebrows, eyes seemingly enveloped with water, and a frail stature. As he pressed his hand on the table, his eyes simply glanced at Hung Jun's face and chest. He approached closer and asked, "What about you two?" Don't get too close," Hung Jun thought to himself. Chu Yongxi then introduced the both of them. "Chu Yongxi, from Hangzhou. This is my first cousin, Xiao Hung Jun. Hung Jun, you two should be about the same age. You should get close to each other. You just entered the capital." Du Hanking never looked away from Hung Jun as he said, "The examination will be held on the 5th day of next month." Hung Jun felt very disquieted, knowing this was a fox Yao. Before he could think more of it, Chu Yongxi stretched over his foot under the table and gave him a kick, without even batting an eyelid. Hung Jun didn't know what to do. He looked into Du Hanking's eyes and started to laugh. Du Hanking couldn't help but also laugh and asked, "How old are you?" The two stated their age. Hung Jun was 2 months older than Du Hanking, and so the latter changed the way he addressed Hung Jun and now called him Gaig. When asked where they lived, Chu Yongxi only said that they were staying with their relatives in the city and came over to the Imperial Academy today to step on the road and get to know the other scholars. You're so young, and you've already come for the Imperial examination. Hung Jun said. That's really tough. Du Hanqing laughed and said, since my family is destitute, they all hope for me to achieve a position of scholarly honor in the examination. Then he reached out his hand to play with the jade peacock plume around Hung Jun's waist. Hung Jun feared that he would be attacked by his penta-colored sacred light and quickly pressed it. Chu Yongxi casually said, it's an open light. Du Hanqing nodded. Not far away, someone called for him. Du Hanqing went over to make tea for them as the boiling water was ready. Hung Jun observed Du Hanqing and could only think of whether he had killed people or how many people he had killed. He heard from Qingxiang in Yaojin Palace that Fox Yao were best at playing with feelings and bewitching people. In the Yao race, Fox Yaos were the most similar to human beings in their emotions, happiness, anger, joy, and sorrow. They were also the most resentful. They knew what being a human was like and appreciated the various tastes of it, but they still couldn't get rid of their Yao's body. He'll come back later. Chu Yongxi handed Hung Jun a white marble jade Buddha and said, give this to him. He won't come, Hung Jun said. He will, Chu Yongxi said. This young fellow has taken a fancy to you. It's quite obvious. Fortunately, Li Zhenqi isn't here. Hung Jun. Sure enough, a moment later, Du Hanqing came back after making tea. It seemed that some of his friends were merely ordering him around and didn't really want to acknowledge him. Hung Jun stared at Du Hanqing. The latter's face turned red as he smiled and said, why do you keep looking at me? You're really good looking, Hung Jun said. He really felt that Du Hanqing's appearance of weak willows indeed had an inexplicable charm. Do you read poetry? Du Hanqing asked Hung Jun. Hung Jun immediately said, I do. Who do you like? Du Hanqing asked again. Li Bai. Hung Jun said. He's my favorite. Du Hanqing said, I prefer Wang Chongling. As a result, Hung Jun exhilaratingly began to talk about poetry. He had to say that although Du Hanqing was a Yaogwai, his poetic discernment wasn't bad. The more Hung Jun talked, the more enthusiastic he became. Forgetting that this guy was a Fox Yao, Hung Jun tried to make him accept Li Bai's poems, but instead he made Du Hanqing pant with rage. Looking towards the west, Chu Yongxi smiled and said, shall we go? Du Hanqing said, I'm not talking to you. Hung Jun but laughed and asked, do you like this? Hung Jun put the jade Buddha on the table, pushed it towards Du Hanqing, and said, you like jade, right? I saw that you like my waist pendant, but it was given to me by my father, so I can't give it to you. Here, take this instead. Hung Jun always looked ignorant before he got acquainted with others. Once he started chatting, he would then be in high spirits and full of energy. He couldn't help making friends with Du Hanqing. Du Hanqing was instantly very touched as he took the jade Buddha and looked at Hung Jun. I'll come to visit you tomorrow, Du Hanqing said. Ah! Hung Jun was struck dumb, thinking, you must not. It would be too dangerous if you went to the exorcism department. Chu Yongxi said, we have a lot of relatives at home. How about you two make an appointment to meet elsewhere? Hung Jun nodded and made an appointment with Du Hanqing at noon tomorrow under the Lishui Bridge. At dusk, Li Jinglong came out of the Feng mansion. Feng Chongqing stood at the door, leaning on his crutches as he said, some progression finally. You wouldn't have asked me that before. Li Jinglong was silent. Feng Chongqing added, I understand your ambition. It's just that to be an official at court is not what you think. Officials but deceive those at the top. When you are no longer able to hide it, that's when you have the chance. I'm afraid it will be too late when that time comes, Li Jinglong said. For them, Feng Chongqing said. It's never too late. Go and have a good plan. Li Jinglong had been furrowing his brows all along. Listening to Feng Changqing's words, he became even more anxious. It was already dusk when they left the Imperial Academy. Hung Jun then recalled that they hadn't checked the 3 men. In the hall, Chu Yangxi said, "They are all transformed Fox Yao." Hung Jun's jaw dropped. When Hung Jun was chatting with Du Hanqing, Chu Yangxi had seriously listened throughout the jumbled conversation in the hall. When the names of those people entered his ears, Chu Yangxi then observed some more. Transformed Fox Yaos. End chapter.